Tim Lueckenhoff. I want to say thank you so much for being on Easy Talk. I have known you now for maybe 7 or 8 years since I've started my amateur career before I was pro. So I knew you even before I was a professional athlete.
Hmm.
And in that time, you've been nothing but respectful and kind to not just me, but all the fighters I've ever seen. The way you conduct yourself and manage your team and staff has been, I think, the world of the state athletic commission here in Missouri. So
Thank you.
first and foremost, thank you so much for being on Easy Talk and for your
Mm,
body of work, man.
absolutely. Appreciate it very much. I've been around a long time, and I've been to several athletic commissions around the country through my years, just watching others regulate, seeing things that were good, seeing a lot of things that were bad. And so I just try to, make it as comfortable as I can for fighters, make it as painless as possible, as quick as we can. And that seems to work. And I think the other issue is I only hire a certain type of person that works with me. I don't want anybody that's confrontational at all, unless you have to be. There's just time and place for that. And those who've seen me turn, they understand that they've done something wrong. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I mean, you kind of touched on it briefly, but you've been doing this now for, correct me, what, 30 or 31 years?
So I started in March of uh, 1995. So I originally started in our division in 1990. I graduated college, I think it was 86, I believe, 85, 86, and went to work as a deputy sheriff for about 5 years to get my experience in investigations. And then I was hired by the Real Estate Commission, which is in the same division as the Office of Athletics. So I was an investigator there and then became a chief investigator. And then in around 1995, the division director came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to move over to the administration side, run an investigative unit, and you'll get the Office of Athletics?" And at that time, basically, it was professional wrestling and boxing was the only thing that was occurring. There wasn't a whole lot of boxing. So that's kind of where I started at. And then in 1996, the legislature passed a bill that allowed for riverboat gambling to be legalized in the state of Missouri. And once that occurred, it just seemed like boxing exploded
Mm.
here in Missouri. I think there was 13 casinos at that time. We were doing fights at three or four of them. There were several years that people won't believe this, but we had more professional boxing shows than Las Vegas, New York, New Jersey.
Here in Missouri?
Yes, consistently. Yes, we were super busy, and we're talking about just under 50 fights a year.
So you're talking about
Um,
almost one every week.
yes, yes, and then that continued until we finally legalized mixed martial arts.
So I want to take, before we even talk about mixed martial arts, I want to talk about like you and your background. So you
Mhm.
said you went to university and you graduated. What was that degree in, if you don't mind me asking?
So yeah, I got a degree in criminal justice. So my goal at that time, I wanted to be a parole officer. Never got an opportunity. I had the day before I got married, uh, which my wife is a teacher, retired teacher now. I was hired by the local sheriff's department there in Jeff City, Cole County, and so I took that job because I really didn't have any other options at that time. We were getting married. I had no job.
You had to get paid.
So yeah, I had to get absolutely. So yeah, and honestly, that was probably the best thing for me to do. And I still think I would probably be there, but we were starting to have kids when I left, and just the fluctuation of nights, days, things like that. It just wasn't suiting well. So
Was this trajectory what you had always planned? Because like I know you say you wanted to be a parole officer, but I mean when you were young, starting out, was like administration or some sort of like position where you're holding authority over others. Was this the goal, or did you just have like more humble ambitions? Like,
no, no, it really wasn't my goal at all. Um, in life, good things happen, bad things happen for a certain reason. I went to the real estate commission just as uh, an initial investigator. The guy who hired me happened to leave about a year or two after I was there. Luckily, I had enough experience investigating and proved to them that, um, you know, I knew how to talk to people, knew how to get information. That they hired me as the chief investigator with just a couple of years as an investigator. And then I caught the attention of the division director, who all our division directors are appointed by the governor. The majority of them are political people. Whoever the governor is, normally that's the party that they're in. But anyway, this gentleman, he hired me to start this unit. So we investigated for like embalmers, funeral directors, real estate appraisers, psychologists, social workers. There was like probably 18 or 19 of those licensing boards that license those professionals in the state. And then when you filed a consumer complaint, I didn't get this service, or I was sexually assaulted, or my loved one, didn't look appropriate in the casket, or just things like that, that we would send investigators out to investigate.
So that's actually one thing that when we had a conversation beforehand shocked me, because I always assumed that like the state athletic commission basically only presided over athletics, but the licensing side to this, I mean, you guys do anything that requires a professional license in the state of Missouri, correct?
Yeah. So our division has about 500,000 different licensees. There's right around 44 licensing boards in our building. So like doctors, nurses, real estate agents, pharmacists, any profession you can think of other than ambulances. Ambulances are regulated by the Department of Health. So any professional license that you have in the state of Missouri comes through our building. And you'll notice the people who have licenses with our office, they get a blue license and they get a little wallet card. You'll see that, the division director signs it. Sheila Salone is her name. And then, of course, whoever the executive director is for that board signs it. So yeah, it's a lot of people don't know that, and that's one point I will drive home is that we get into this a lot with promoters and others. They'll send in a check with their name on it, nothing else. You got to realize that money all goes to a special cash receiving office, because you can imagine you got 44 different licensing boards and people are sending checks. Some of our people send cash in. You can't have that all out, in the various offices. So there's this.
Not if you want a good audit.
Correct. And we do get audited. I mean, to be honest, when I first came on in 1995, I think one of the reasons I was brought on is the director before me, they had lax accounting standards.
Oh, no.
And so the state auditor came in and huge audit findings for what they did. So that's why I have certain procedures the way I do. And a lot of, some people don't like it, but I have an event number for every event. Every individual fee you get from me, you get a receipt. I get people to come up to me and say, I don't need a receipt for that. I don't know. You don't need a receipt, but I do. And this is to prove I'm not stealing your money.
Yeah.
Because, most professions, well, I should say all the professions other than us, they're a check type business, money order type business. We're still cash. We still take cash because some people don't have the ability to do that. So it's very important that anybody who works for me has a lot of integrity, because obviously, integrity, and once you lose your integrity, in my opinion, you lose everything. So
I agree. That's what they say, like, I'll trust you until you give me a reason not to.
That's right. Very true. And I always try to be upfront and honest with everybody. And, if we make a mistake, we try to correct it. But anyway, the bottom line is, I guess the point I was really trying to make is that you can think of us as the office of athletics, but when you communicate with us, we're huge.
Yeah, you're one of many, like 44 different branches of this one entity.
Right.
Terribly sorry to interrupt the content that you're enjoying right now, but if you've been watching our content for the past couple of months, you realize that Easy Talk is a brand new podcast. We're genuinely trying to figure this thing out as we're going. Some growing pains for sure. If you are genuinely enjoying this content, we feel very humble in that, but we would like to ask that you would also subscribe and like to the channel, simply because it does help us in the algorithms and ultimately to grow. So take a second. I'd really appreciate it. And on with the show.
And in addition to my Office of Athletic duties, I also have the Office of Athlete Agents, which is a really small office. I think there's 74 licensees, but those are people who negotiate on behalf of college athletes who have either declared for the draft or who have completed their eligibility. So they'll negotiate contracts, the mediator between the professional team and the athletes. So it really has nothing to do with NIL. Everybody talks about now. NIL is somewhat regulated by the state, but we regulate those athlete agents. So if there's a great football player at the University of Missouri, we'll have an influx of athlete agents who get licensed here. And their only goal is to go over there to agent day at the University of Missouri and try to talk that athlete into using their services. So I don't have a whole lot of duties with that. There's no complaints that I've had in probably 15 or 18 years I've been doing that, which thankfully is great. But those athlete agents, if you become an athlete agent, you have to get registered with the Players Association for the sport you're negotiating on behalf. So if you're going to
Makes sense.
Yeah, if you're going to regulate or if you're going to negotiate on behalf of a football player, you got to go to the NFLPA. You got to get registered there. You got to do your fingerprints, pass a background check. So you've done all that. Now, when they come to me, unfortunately, they have to do the same thing.
Yeah. Can I ask if that's ever extended? And I don't mean to flip flop here, but one of the things that happens in fighting is like management, right? So like fighter management. Do management companies have to do something similar like this? Does, Iridium, who has like, I don't know, like 250 different UFC fighters on roster, do they have to get some sort of sanctioning or some sort of license with states that they have fighters in?
No, they don't. It's just for those athletes who enter collegiate sports. So
Understood.
like basketball, baseball, football, things like that.
Can I ask a question that is kind of separate from fighting? So I know that there's a state athletic commission, and I know that there's something called MISHA, which is like the Missouri Missouri State High School Sports Athletic Association, correct? MISHA.
Missouri State High School Activities
Oh
Association.
my gosh, I'm sorry, man. So it's a long acronym. Forgive me.
It is. They need to shorten. Actually, I know all about this because I think I've told you this before. I'm starting my 32nd year of refereeing high school football. So I was just at a training seminar last week, but they only deal with high school sports.
Yes.
So we'll get phone calls, and it's funny to listen to our voicemails about my son didn't get to play here or there. Like, you got the wrong place.
Hey, man, that sounds awful. You should call those guys.
Yeah. So just to back up, there's athletic commissions and there's offices of athletics. So this is important because in 1996 there was a federal law passed that said that if you're going to allow boxing, professional boxing, in your state, you have to either have a commission or an office of athletics. And if you don't have that, you can't have boxing in your state. And so we used to have an athletic commission. This is kind of interesting. And Jerry Galliano, one of my inspectors, sent me an article from the 1950s that talked about the Missouri Athletic Commission. And they mainly regulated wrestling at that time and boxing. But it said that the fee was $25 per show and 5% of the gate is what they took in at that time.
In the 1950s?
In the 1950s.
That's actually a lot. That's actually a lot of money. That's actually a lot of money.
At that time, it probably was a lot of money. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, getting back to, we don't have an athletic commission here. I don't have board members that make decisions. We have an office of athletics, so that just leaves me, and my boss is the division director. So any decisions that are made are basically my decisions. And then if you don't like my decision, then you go up the chain of command to our division director.
So I understand that you guys kind of handle the licensing for various, occupations and licensing for both athletics and for, anyone from a boxer to a massage therapist, right? Mm-hmm. I want to be careful how I ask this question. Let's say someone somewhere messes up, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said that you have investigations before to kind of like bring up some sort of wrongdoing that has happened. Mm-hmm. What do fighters usually have to do in order to get their licenses revoked? Like in your historical experience, the guys that have lost their licenses, like what was like usually the cause for this?
Most of that is severe drug test, something other than marijuana. We mainly use suspension or even probation in some cases. I know last year we placed an individual on suspension for 6 months because he held an amateur I think it was kickboxing, in a gym setting where he charged admission
Oh,
for
this is
that.
like a promoter.
This is like a
Someone
person
running.
acting as a promoter and going outside the law. Because the law
Got
says
you.
if you're going to do kickboxing, boxing, you have to be regulated. And the statute also says we regulate exhibitions. So you can't say, well, we're just going to have exhibitions. No,
Doesn't work
we
that way.
regulate exhibitions. So if you're truly just going to have a sparring session, then you shouldn't be charging the public to come in. So I've only had one serious drug test that's came back from me, and it was a kid that had cocaine in his system. Unfortunately, he was a boxer. It's been years ago, and sad to say, about 4 or 5 years ago, he passed away. And I'm sure it was probably from that problem.
That lifestyle.
But for the most part, we have what are called medical suspensions in the statute. It says I can give a medical suspension up to 180 days and require any type of medical testing. So you'll see these guys who, if they get knocked out and they're unconscious, I mean, that's automatic 6-month neuro exam with a note from the neurologist stating they can continue. So it kind of varies from there, but to discipline a person, and probably should talk about this a little bit. You know, we used to test probably 4 or 5 years ago randomly for a 10-panel drug screen. And it would give you an immediate test result. And that was like fishing in a barrel. I mean, every time I test, 9 out of 10 would be
10
positive.
panels, what, like
So amphetamines, barbiturates, THC.
Oh, okay, so yeah.
10 different drugs,
Yeah,
10
okay.
different categories of drugs. And it would give you an immediate result.
Don't go to a jiu-jitsu gym, Tim.
I know.
You're going to get 80% of the guys.
I know. And we were catching people left and right. And of course, the thing about it is that to prosecute a case, you're talking thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, I have to. So our office is what's called fee funded. So we basically have a checking account that we can pay our bills, but the legislature says you can only spend this amount of money this year. So if
So
you
you're
go over
still
that,
given a budget.
Yep, still given a budget. So if you have to go over that amount, you got to go back to the legislature and ask for emergency funding. So
Can I ask you a question about the logistics of that? So if you are fee funded, meaning like someone has a show, they have to have the state athletic commission there. You charge them a fee. If there is one show a year, you're going to make so much money. If there's 100 shows a year, obviously it's going to be 100x. But when you tell me that there's like still a budget, I don't understand why that budget would exist. Because it's like, if there's more volume, one would be led to assume that there's also going to be more expense. Yeah. So that's kind of like capping you, or like capping the amount of shows that can happen in a year. Was that by design?
it's a legislative thing, so they can control the money and tell you what you can spend. So yes, you're right. I mean, this last year was probably our busiest year for big shows. Last fiscal year, which is July 1st to June 30th, we had 215 shows our office regulated.
Jesus.
So, and there was about 47 or 48 MMA shows, I think 13 boxing, and the rest were professional wrestling shows.
Oh, wow. Pro wrestling is volume.
Yeah, and we had a very good year. I mean, UFC coming here was about 119,000 in taxes. We had AEW has been here 4 or 5 times, and I mean, they're just doing phenomenal gates. And then, of course, WWE comes here. Those are the people who pay the bills and keep everybody's license fees low. I was at a weigh-in yesterday, and we're right in the middle of all our licenses expired June 30th, so everybody has to renew, and they'll be good till June 30th of 2026. So, a couple of these guys are like, oh, man, I got to pay, and I just think about it. Your fighting license is $20 per year. Go across the state line here and try to get you a license in Illinois and see how much that costs.
I have no idea.
Triple, and it's only for a year.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and other states are like that. So these big promotions that come in are keeping our license fees low because, like you said, if we hit a couple years, and we were like this coming out of COVID in 2020, we were on a course of about a year and a half, our office would have been out of money. So I decided that we should implement a surcharge, $1 per ticket. I said, that's money flow coming in, and unfortunately, last year was a great year. So I think we took in like 124,000. But again, that keeps that license fee low.
May I just ask for a little clarification? This $1 per ticket was. Are you saying that it didn't exist before COVID, but then because of COVID, there were like a lot of financial stresses and burdens on the office, and you guys had to recoup the. I guess the best way to say is like not the fund, but the money jar, so to speak.
Yeah, you had to reload the checking account.
So is this $1 per ticket? Is this gonna be like a thing that like maintains, or like once the coffers are at a certain level, you'll take that back out? How do you guys navigate those waters? Like
So this is a little bit complicated.
for sure, money usually is.
Yeah, it is. And the worst part about mine is July is the month where I have to do revenue estimates for the next year. So I've got to project how many people we're going to license, how many shows how much tax we're going to bring in. And it's difficult. I mean, licenses pretty well stay somewhat constant, but shows and the number of big shows are hard to predict, because our shows around here, Nemesis, Shamrock, Zach Cummings down in Springfield and Kansas City, Joe Wooster. I mean, those guys are on their shows. They're averaging anywhere from 3,000 to 4,500. It's what we take in on those shows in taxes and surcharge. But again, the bills are constant, so we have to have that money. So bottom line is here. I'm just going to say it, and you can play it in slow motion. The state law is that, and this accounts for every licensing board. It says you can only have 2.5 times your annual appropriation in your fund. So our budget is right around $340,000, $350,000 a year is what the legislature says you can spend on salaries, travel, rent, utilities, all those things. Just like if you're living in a house, you have to pay for trash. We have to pay for the Attorney General's service. We have to pay for the Secretary of State services, the Governor's service. Every fee-funded agency gets hit with a fee that you have to pay based upon your average licensee count. So 2.5 times. So that's for 700,
850.
So 850,000. So we're right
meaning
there.
If you exceed that, like you meaning you can't exceed that.
You
right?
can't exceed it. But if you exceed it, then any money over that amount is transferred to general revenue. So our goal, and this has happened to me before, where I've been to this point and I've had to pay some of that money into general revenue. So our goal always is stay under that amount. So we'll watch it this year because we're right at that threshold right now. I think I just looked at the other day. It seems like we got about 800.
Well, yeah, if you got the UFC coming to town and it's 119,000,
yeah.
Dude, that's like almost 20% of your,
yeah.
actually like 18% of your your coffer amount.
Yeah, it is. That's absolutely.
Huge.
So we'll monitor that. So what'll happen is if we have another good year, we'll probably do a license fee reduction. I'll probably keep the surcharge because that helps me on wrestling shows, because we regulate wrestling shows that have 15 people in attendance to thousands in attendance. Most of them are that 50 to 75 people. So I get a $150 permit fee from them, and I get 5% of the gate, okay, which is usually $1,000, $1,500 total gate. So we're talking maybe 75 in taxes, and then a surcharge. So I pay my inspectors for wrestling $175
for a show,
per show,
which could be anywhere between 5 hours, 6 hours.
Yeah, 5, 6 plus, and then
they
got their travel.
Yeah.
Plus the federal reimbursement rate right now for mileage is 65.5 cents a mile. So, I mean, when we have them drive anywhere, I mean, it starts racking up. So what I'm trying to get at is that we have all these small wrestling shows that lose money. And that's why it's important to have these other shows.
But you still have to, because this is now your responsibility. You have to sanction these people. You have to make sure that they're following the laws and they're adhering to safety protocol. So like the legislature has decided that this needs to happen. So now it's your job to ensure that it can happen. That
is correct. And a lot of people say, well, they should pay their amount, make sure it's covered. But then again, as long as we keep these larger promotions who are not in Missouri continue to come in here, they're basically paying for our fees to remain low. And again, a corner license back in 2020, I raised that $10. That was the first time in my 29-year career that I ever raised a fee. We never have raised fees on any of our licensees at all. But we did raise them on seconds. We raised them $10, and then on amateur contestants used to be $30. We raised it to $40, and really it's just a logistical thing. Because when I go to a weigh-in, oh, you owe $40, you owe $30, it was just a pain.
A pain in the ass.
Yeah, and it's since people still use cash, when you break it up in a 10.
You don't want to be having to carry
Yeah,
$400
I
or
mean, that
$500
sounds
in
bad.
cash for you.
Yeah, it just works better in those multiples. So
I can tell you as an amateur, it never bothered me. I always looked at it as like the cost of doing business. Like, hey, you guys are out there making sure that I'm safe and like requiring blood work and all these other things, which by the way, thank you. Like, this is what we want. You know what I mean? Makes for a safer sport. So like, it's kind of one of those things where you kind of hit the nail on the head before. We were like, okay, $40 for what, a year or 2 years? It's
2 years.
2 years. So it's like when you divvy that up per month,
it's nothing.
you
It's
spend
nothing.
more on your morning coffee. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. You say blood work. That when we legalized regulating professional mixed martial arts, I think that was in 09, I think
2009.
Was that it? Okay, good. I'm telling you, time's flying.
Oh, dude, you're good.
So anyway, part of that was that we treat those fighters just like we do boxers, just like we do wrestlers. Everybody has to do blood work. But we don't test for amateurs. And that just goes back to,
Putting the cost on them.
Yeah, and I wish we did, but the point I wanted to make is that when we first started requiring blood work on martial arts fighters, and I had some of these guys who had fought pro forever, we were getting a lot of positive hepatitis C testing. And guys that have multiple fights. And that's scary. That would be scary to me as a fighter, knowing that potentially I'm participating against someone who has Hep C, and they didn't know it.
Of course.
I mean, they had no idea that they had it. But I just think it's a good thing that if everybody's tests for it at least yearly, to prevent any spread of anything. Now, we've never had any that I'm aware of, any spreading of any diseases in the cage, but I'd probably be the last to know that.
I would also say that like this is something where I would say, what is the purview or what is the responsibility of the state? What is the responsibility of the promotion? Mm-hmm. This becomes a kind of like a blurry line because I would make the argument that like the promotion, whenever I think of state, I think of minimum, meaning like this is what the minimum that is required to do this legally. So I don't mean minimum in like a derogatory way. I mean like this is the barrier to entry, right?
Online,
if you can't do this, then you can't do the show. Mm-hmm. But then the promotion, because they're the ones that handle the actual like capital expenditure of these and then also reap all the rewards, like you want to be able to kind of set the pace for whatever product it is that you're providing. And, if that means drug testing, if that means blood work, if that means physicals and all these other things, I want to be careful how I say this. I don't think the state should be involved in like every aspect.
Overreaching. And
Yes.
I can tell you that because when we first started blood work, obviously it was unpopular because
It's an added expense.
But
Can I say something?
yeah.
And forgive my language? Fuck that. I'm glad you guys did it. I'm glad you guys
It
did it.
needed to be done.
Yes.
It's kind of funny here. Where was I at? Oh, I was in St. Anne at a fight at the community center a couple months ago, and a fighter was there, and I kind of joked with her, and I don't think she caught it, but I said, "Yeah, here's the person why we have these annual physicals," because she got on the interview and said all you have to have is a heartbeat to fight in the state of Missouri. And this was 20 years ago.
And Tim's like, thanks. Now
So
we gotta set a standard.
you're the reason that we have more medical testing. And I don't think she caught my joke, but anyway. But that was it. I mean, we had to start implementing more testing and I'm talking 20 years ago. You used to just do a pre-fight physical the night of the fight. The weigh-in was the day of the fight. the morning of the fight, and you did your pre-fight physical that night, and we were eliminating so many people who had high blood pressure, who had heart murmurs, who had hernias, and then the promoter just loses that fight at night. So that's why we implemented this comprehensive physical exam, is to eliminate that before the fight, so promoters don't lose fights the day of.
Yeah.
Um, so, I've had other people tell me, well, you don't do eye exams? Well, the doctor can do an eye exam as part of their annual physical if they see an issue. And if we notice an issue with a fighter, that's when I have that rule that says you have to have additional testing. You have to go to an ophthalmologist. You have to get cleared, that kind of thing. So I think we're setting pretty good with our testing, because the more testing that you add is coming out of the promoter's pocket, because you get to the point where these fighters are not going to pay for it. If you want them to fight, the promoter's going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, this was a conversation you and I had regarding drug testing, because I know for a fact, well, I can't say for a fact, let's just say that there were times where I've seen people fight that didn't pass the eye test, right?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, like, who's necessarily like in charge of this? Is it the state who, you guys are doing this balancing act between like, what can we afford to do? And then if we take on more, we're going to have to charge more. And then it's like this weird game of like, okay, you want the state to do the blood work, the drug testing, getting people to the venue, making sure everyone's following all the rules, getting the right amount of staff. Because if you have a UFC event versus a local wrestling promotion, that's going to be how many more state athletic commission employees versus, like maybe 3 or 4 versus 20 or 30. So like there's a lot of variable costs. And then like we were talking about earlier, like the mechanics, the finances of this is, okay, well, if you want us to take all of this and we're fee based, well, now your state, your amateur license now costs $300 for every year. So it's like, what do you guys want us to do? It's like, do you guys want us to take on all this? And then now we're kind of bringing that burden onto you financially and maybe making it almost financially inviable to even do this?
That's right.
Or do we want to say, hey, our goal is to keep people safe. Our goal is to try to do the best we can, because at the end of the day, this is like, a head trauma sport. I mean, at the end of the day, you're getting in there and punching each other in the face and kicking each other in the face. So like, how safe is it really, right? But there should be, like I said earlier, this floor, this minimum of what we all establish as like the correct course of action. And like I said earlier, when we first started this conversation, as a fighter, I've enjoyed watching you guys work. I've never felt unsafe. Or I'll give you a piece of anecdotal evidence, actually. When I was still an amateur, there was supposed to be a fight between me and another fighter. I'm not going to say his name for obvious reasons. But for some reason, between promotions, like we want to do it on this promotion, we want to do it on that promotion, never happened, okay? He then went pro and then couldn't fight because he got popped for Hep C. Yep. And I remember thinking to myself, like, thank God. Yeah. Thank God. Like, because I was about to go pro myself, and that was like going to be one of the first fights. Like, I was like, now, I know that Shamrock, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure Shamrock makes the amateurs do blood work too. Like, that's like a promotion thing.
Some of them, it's odd. Some of them do, some of them don't.
I'm fairly certain Shamrock does.
Yeah, there's one, Nemesis is one that if they're doing MMA as an amateur, they require it. So I do get a lot of those in. Yeah, but kickboxing, they don't. I always make the argument of, would they bleed in kickboxing too? but at least it's a start. It's a start.
It's great. Can I ask you a question? Are there any things that like, because there's things that I see all the time where I'm like, are you serious? Like, for instance, knees to the head and elbows to the head for amateurs. I'm like, dude, if you're not getting paid, don't get cut. Correct. Right? Yeah. But then I think to myself, like, okay, so I can't elbow you, but I can throw my shin bone into your head. So I'm like, and then I kind of catch myself and I'm like, if I was going to get hit, I would actually rather like an elbow instead of someone's bat.
Yeah. The elbows have been one that nobody's allowed that I'm aware of in amateurs. But the knee part, the reason I wrote that rule, and it says you have to have 5 fights before you can throw knees to the head.
So even amateurs?
Yeah, amateurs can knee to the head
if they have over 5 fights.
Both and competitors. They agree to it, and both fighters agree. And my thought process behind that was that early in my career, we used to have some Muay Thai, and we allowed knees to the head there. And I've seen people get their teeth knocked out, and I just wanted fighters to know, or at least gain that experience before they had an opportunity to get kneed right square in the mouth. Because I felt like if you allow knees from the first fight, and you see some of these novice guys fight, if you allow knees to the head there's potential for real damage, and those guys are done. Once they get some teeth knocked out, I would guarantee you they're never coming back in the cage. So it's kind of an introductory thing, at least in the way I see it. Some people may agree or disagree, but again, I see a lot of very novice, first-time backyard fighters, and I don't want to give them that.
That's
that
fair.
Weapon.
I'm always cool with like an escalating or maybe like an experience based rubric where it's like, if this is your first fight, we don't want to scare you away. And more importantly, I mean, there are some promotions that are bad actors, and they might, get this guy who's 0-0 against a guy who's like 6-1.
Yeah.
This guy's going to smoke him. The last thing you want him to do is like also get beat and like traumatically hurt.
Get injured. Yeah.
Yes.
See, now MMA is not quite as bad as boxing is, where you see people building records like it. With boxing,
Talk about it, Tim. Because I feel like it's getting there.
It is. It's getting there. The good part about it is that there's a nationwide database that I can look at fighters. Now, I add all the kickboxing and mixed martial arts, amateur and pro records to mixedmartialarts.com. That is
You do that?
I do that. I enter their, so when you go on their website and you see their picture and their record and all that, that's entered. If they're from my office, from Missouri, I enter that in there. So that's where I track all those fighters. So here about 2-3 years ago, I went back to whenever I first started keeping records for kickboxing, and I added in all that historical data. So everybody's his kickboxing records, pro and amateur, should be in that database back from 2009.
Oh, wow. You went back in time to put that in.
Yeah, I went back and submitted those results. They put them in. That helps me because I have a rule that says that if you lose 10 fights in a row by any method, you can't be approved here. If you lose
in the state of Missouri?
Anywhere. So if you're fighting, Kansas, Illinois, and you lose, you continue to lose. If you lose 10 in a row, you can't be approved. And then I also have a rule that says if you've lost 6 in a row by TKO or KO, you can't be approved.
That makes sense, actually.
It does. It's time to get out.
You're protecting them from themselves.
Yeah, and I had to unfortunately tell a fighter that's going to fight tonight. I said, okay, you're at 8. I said, you're fighting a kid that's making his amateur debut. I said, if you lose 2 more, you're done. I'm not approving.
He's lost 8 fights in a row.
8 fights in a row.
And
yeah, he's been somewhat competitive, but he's still losing.
Gotcha.
And so anyway, I always make it a point, and of course they never remember this, to tell them at the weigh-in before, look, and I did it on the last Shamrock show, on their main event, a kid that came in to fight, and I just said, look, this is the way it is here. I said, you lose, I think he was at 8-2, and I said, this is going to be number 9 when you lose tonight because no one's going to win. I said, you better be wise about who you fight number 10 because when you hit number 10, you're not coming back here again. I don't care what they do anywhere else. You're not fighting here.
Let me ask you a question, though. Just devil's advocate on this one. Mm-hmm. Let's say they do get to that 10-loss threshold and they fight in some other state and get a win. How do you do it then? Like, do you look at that and say,
okay, who that wins against?
Fair.
If they fight a guy that's 0-10 and beat him, that don't count.
Yeah. Okay. So you're it's like 10 losses, but also if it's, you recently got a couple wins and you had a bad losing streak and you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I see that you're trying to play the game here. You might still step in. Because ultimately it's your decision. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right. That's like your executive your executive position is like, there can't be a fight without your approval. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, the rules state that the office approves and denies all fights.
Okay.
So if I don't like a fight, and I do this quite a bit, I get, it's so frustrating because I'll get promoters say, well, you treat me differently than everybody else. And I say, you call that promoter, you call this promoter, you ask them if I've ever denied one of their fights. I do look at records, I look at who they fought before, and then there's people that stick in your mind. I remember when he did this. I know he's terrible. And I'm not approving this guy. Even sometimes when they don't hit that.
When you say, I knew he did this, I knew he was terrible, are you referring to fighters or promoters?
Fighters. No, fighters.
Okay.
I remember what they did in a certain fight. Or we had a boxing show here in...
well, if you don't mind me asking, do you ever hold the promotions accountable as well? Like, do you ever go to the promotions and say like,
that
hey,
matchmaker accountable.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
the one who gets his ass chewed.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. It's like, hey, like, why are you getting me involved in this? Like, you should have been
Right.
able to like see that this is not a competitive fight. Like, what are we doing here? So you've
Yeah.
had those conversations beforehand.
Yeah, so I know I have a fight card laying on my desk, and they gave me a generic name. It was like Joe Smith, something like that. So I looked whatever this guy's name is, up, and so I email him back, and I say, "You're not talking about the 52-year-old guy who's got XXX, right?" And I haven't heard back. So you know what that tells me?
So that's
We're
exactly
talking
what
about the
it is.
52-year-old guy that can't fight.
Oh
You
no.
know, so, but I was getting back to, we had a boxing show in May here over in St. Charles, and we had 2 fights which fighters took dives. You know, and in this promotion, he has very good fighters.
Forgive me. For so those that might not be inundated to this world, when you say 2 fighters took dives, what does that mean? They lost on
Okay.
purpose?
Yes. So both of them took phantom punches, acted like they got hit, went down, stumbled around.
You know what they say, the one that you don't see hurts you the most.
Yeah.
And if no one else saw it, imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sparring with one of them yet by email and fax. So I gave him, I think it was 180 days. And generally when they do stupid stuff like that, I make them do a major medical test. So he actually got a neuro exam, and the doctor had to write on the exam he could continue boxing. So anyway, it's kind of funny because he first he sends me a neuro exam with the doctor's signature just scribbled. Can't read it. No license number, no address.
No.
Okay, and I said, okay, I got to have the doctor's name, his license number, and he's got to say you can continue boxing. So he faxed me a note and said, can continue boxing, and scribbled. So I'm like, okay.
He's not selling this.
Yeah, I've been down this road before. I'm like, okay, I just want you to know I'm going to call this doctor, and I'm going to ask him if he saw you, and I'm going to ask him if he wrote this, and guess what? If he says no, what's going to happen to you?
Or if he doesn't pick up because he doesn't exist.
Yeah, so needless to say, I've got nothing from him, and he'll just go away. But you know, we're in a situation where there's some really great fighters here in St. Louis right now, boxers, I'm saying, and that have really good records, and it's very hard to find people on a St. Louis show, budget show, to bring opponents in. So they bring these guys in with, 50-50 records, but they're not going to win. And these 2 guys just happen to come here for the payday. I mean, that upsets me. That I don't mind if you have a bad record and you fight hard, but when you come here and lay down and pick up your check and leave, you're gonna leave with something you really don't want.
I think it's also good. You're kind of protecting the promotions from themselves in this aspect too, because like what you're essentially doing is upholding a standard for the entertainment factor. Right. If these guys are coming in from out of town because X, Y, and Z reason, and they are going and they're taking dives, not trying, what does that say to the people that are like, first of all,
the bottom line is, if I pay $100 for a ticket,
exactly,
ringside, and I see crap
I want to see
like
a fight. I want to see a fight.
I'm not coming back.
Exactly.
And that's what these promoters have to understand. And I preach to them all the time that when you put on fights like that, you're hurting yourself.
You're hurting everybody and yourself.
Yeah.
And you're going to make it harder for everybody going forward. And I agree. I mean, I've had some conversations with some matchmakers around the time, and they'll ask me like, "What'd you think of this card?" And I'm like, "Not your best."
Sometimes I hate it when you say that.
Yeah. Sometimes I give them grace because, like, dude, you could put a card together and it could look like, whoa, you're putting so and so together. Yeah. And then like one guy goes out there, maybe does something stupid, gets knocked out in 15 seconds. One guy gets hurt. Like, dude, every card is subject to the whims.
It looks good on paper, but then it doesn't turn out that way.
Or vice versa. It could be like, oh, really? And then like, you go out there and maybe that guy turns it on that day and like all the stars align and he looks like a world beater. But I do like that because these are things I didn't know, Tim. I didn't know that you were like looking at all the records. And I asked Rob Donaker when he was on, and I'm actually going to have Chad Mueller on next after his next show.
Good.
Yeah, I want to talk to like the people that, the reason you're on is because I was a fighter, so I understand the fighting, but I was never in the State Athletic Commission. I was never a ref, a judge, or anything. So like, I know that you guys were there, but I don't know like what you were doing. This is when we were talking for like 30 minutes after the weigh-ins at Shamrock, you were like blowing my mind. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know any of this, right? So
yeah, a lot of people don't understand how involved it is.
Oh my gosh.
I know I served as an expert witness probably been 10 or 12 years ago on a boxer who injured his hand in California, and they were wanting to know about how the process of approving fights. They were asking that. And they finally figured, the attorneys finally figured out, that's what I do every day in my job, is I research who the opponents are of the person you're trying to approve, and then based upon that information.
Forgive me for this next question because I'm not trying to date you in any way, shape, or form, but like you've been in this for so long that like the advancements of technology, I would make the argument, have made your job easier.
Oh yeah.
So like how difficult was this process before things like MMA, warehouse and Tapology and SureDog and all these other like online resources for, you can get on Tapology or any of these resources, and I can click on somebody's name, and I can see the last fights from like the last 10 years, and then I can click on their opponents and see their records at the time that they fought and their records now. I mean, it is such an amazing tool that I, as a fighter, would use when I was like, who's next on the line to get me to where I want to go? But I'm sure for you, for the State Athletic Commission, now you're not keeping like a little book handy with like everybody's name and information, and now you have the resources that we're all using as well. Is this something that, I mean, obviously you probably approve of it because it's just more transparency, but was this something like that you guys were trying to like implement yourselves, or just the market did it themselves and you guys are taking it and running with it?
No, I can tell you when I first started back in '95, like we talked about, there was a company called Fight Facts, FAX. That was the official boxing record keeper. And you would have to contact them. They'd fax you a fighter's fight record, much like it appears on, the MMA database without a picture. And then he'd publish a book every year. So every year, July, he'd publish all the active boxers in a big old book like this and list of records. And that was kind of your reference unless you needed an updated one during the year. So during that time, I was working real closely with the commissioner in Indiana. His name was Jake Hall. And then down in Oklahoma was another gentleman. And then in Nebraska. And everybody knows I take a picture of the fighters first time I see them and when I renew their update or when I do their ID. So when I first started, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start taking pictures of all these fighters. I used to take Polaroids. I'd have to take them to Walmart and get them developed. And so I knew who they were. So anyway.
But why did you feel like you had to do that? Because people were lying
using
about
fake names.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's kind of, these are funny stories. But the Indiana guy and I got together and we started sharing pictures. Okay, you recognize this guy, and so anyway, on the Jeff, we used to have a fight in Jeff City a couple times a year boxing, and so on this one, I don't know if I still have it or not, but it was on in the Jeff City newspaper. Tommy Bowles is getting, knocking somebody out. It was Verdell Smith from Oklahoma, so we had pictures of him. We shared from the Oklahoma guy, me, Indiana, and then he used a fake name. And then, so there's like about 10 or 12 of those guys like that when they fought in Missouri, this was their name. When they fought in Indiana, this was their name. When they fought in Oklahoma, that's their name. And so what they did is they would go from state to state, each week fighting, because once you got knocked out, you get suspended.
But if you go to a different state under a different name,
right? Yeah, then you fight. So, if y'all will take a look at a fighter by the name of Buck Smith, he's a boxer, Buck Smith. You look down on, he's got about 215 fights. Great guy. You'll see on his record where he fought in Missouri, right around Joplin is where it was, on the early part of a fight card on one day. The same night,
oh no,
he went into Oklahoma and fought a second time. It's on his record, and so that's where the technology started up, and that's where I was telling you earlier about this.
You're talking about like a 3-4 hour difference.
Yeah,
between like
fought first fight in Missouri,
main event somewhere else.
Boom, he goes to Tulsa or Oklahoma City. He's fighting
about a warm up.
He's fighting the main event. So anyway, but it was funny when we caught these guys because the sad part is they were all great guys. They were great fighters. They could fight with anybody.
Well,
I mean,
obviously,
maybe
if
go
they're
this weekend.
confident enough to take 2 fights on one night, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, I look up Buck Smith. That's kind of fun. But again, getting back to that's why the federal law changed, the technology changed, is that when these pictures started showing up and you required IDs on people and ID numbers, then you were ensured that that result went on the correct fighter. And that's why, matter of fact, I've been preaching to the Iowa commissioner who's been a promoter for a while and been in the job out here, said, you got to start issuing MMA IDs for your Iowa fighters because you have a ton of fighters up there, but you don't
A lot
put
of
a
the
picture
Missouri
on
guys
them.
goes up
You
there
don't issue
too.
my ID. I said, I'm issuing all your IDs for you. And you got variations of spellings on people that have 3 or 4 different records, and we don't know what their real record is. So the databases and the IDs are so important, for our job. I don't want to go back to where it was because I mean, you were just guessing when you approved somebody if you didn't know who they were.
You're talking about corresponding and working with a lot of these other state athletic commissions. Can you walk me through that process? Because, like, obviously you have jurisdiction here in Missouri, but you have no authority or power in another state. What is that paradigm like when you're asking the commissioner in Iowa, like, hey, can you please do all these things? Like, I mean, if he wants to, he can tell you, go F yourself, brother. So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, he definitely could. But I think for me, it's longevity. When I first started my career, I got involved in the Association of Boxing Commissions. And within 2 years, I was vice president. And I was their president for 14 years. So I developed a good rapport with a lot of people around the country. And Chad Bergmeyer's his name from Iowa. He was a promoter. He knew me from, trying to do shows down here. And they're just looking for help,
Yeah.
just ideas on thoughts that they need to do. And I may not be right, but it's what works for me.
well, I mean, it's also like it's good to kind of brainstorm together, right? It's like, hey, we did this show in this place and this happened, and we should probably not allow it to happen again. Or we tried this thing and
Yeah.
it's working beautifully. So, like, here's some positive reinforcement, some negative reinforcement, just to kind of, they say wisdom is not learning from your own mistakes, but learning from somebody else's. So it's like,
Absolutely.
why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been through mistakes. I still make mistakes now.
Do you get anybody that emails you, like, telling you to change something?
I haven't lately, but I'm sure I've had in the past. I've gotten a few emails on when are you going to implement these new rules, that the ABC just passed last week, and I've always lectured the ABC, and they don't like it.
Just real quick, what does ABC stand for? Forgive me.
Association of Boxing Commissions.
Thank you, sir.
Most of the state tribal commissions from the U.S. and Canada are members. They've got a member from Brazil that regulates down there, and but when they change a rule or change a unified rule, everybody has to understand there's a process to do that in state government, and it's just not by erasing out a rule and writing a new one in. It's a process that takes from 6 to 9 months. And it takes a lot of approvals to get it done. So in order to change the new grounded rule and the 12 to 6 elbow, if we decide we're going to make those changes here, I have to first get approval from our department, which is basically filling out a form as long as your arm and providing all the justifications for it. Once they approve it, the governor has to approve it. And then at that point, it goes to the Secretary of State. They publish it in the Missouri Register, which people have opportunities to comment. And this is all set up on timetables, a certain number of days. Once it gets through there, then it goes through the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, and they have to approve it at the legislature. And then it's published again for more comments.
Jesus
And
Christ.
then if there's no comments, it becomes law. So, example, I have a rule.
I don't envy that process at all, Tim. I'm sorry.
Luckily, I'm on the front end. I write the rule. Attorney approves the writing of it. I fill this form out on, effects it's going to have for small business and why we need it, all that stuff. Good example is I have a rule that says that in order for an MMA fighter to turn pro, they must have 6 fights with a winning record. It says it right in the rule. So I want to implement this same thing for boxing because, again, I'm seeing people coming into boxing who have no experience at all as an amateur, and I don't want them to turn pro, and then go somewhere else to turn pro. So I started that in January. That is going to become effective October 30th, I believe. So that's how long it took because I wrote it. I wrote
Roughly
the
10
I wrote the
months.
rule. I wrote the worksheet in probably 2 days, but the rest of that time was going through that
Legislative process.
So with these rules, the ABC, I haven't even started thinking about that yet, but I have to look at the rule, which I somewhat agree. I'm okay with the grounded rule, and I'm okay with 12-6 because I get complaints about that now, and then the referee say, "Well, he angled." It's so hard.
It's also, I don't envy the job of like a referee live in it. I've only ever done one instance myself where I reffed a kickboxing fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a fighter, so like I kind of know what to look for. And even then, I was kind of late to some things. I'm like, dude, being a ref is so unbelievably difficult, and to implement not only when to properly stop a fight, when is a fighter hurt, when should I, intervene, what is a 10 count, or sorry, a standing 8 count, what is a fight over? Like it's so difficult. And then on top of that, having to like, oh well, was the elbow from 11-5 or 12-6? It's like, dude, come on, let's make this a little bit easier on the people that are trying to make the sport a little safer. I would also make the argument that I made earlier. It's like I can throw my shin bone at your jaw, but if I'm on top of you, I can't like throw a 12-6.
And the referees honestly have the worst seat in the house. I know that from officiating football. The closer you are, the harder it is to see everything, and they're so focused in.
You can't appreciate it.
Yeah, they're so focused in on a certain area, motion where they don't see things that happen below. So when things like that occur, that's just part of the sport. I don't overturn fights based upon things like that.
No, I wouldn't expect you to either. That's kind of a rough one to do. I mean,
But
even if you wanted to, the amount of evidence and the amount of like circumstantial like variables, it's so tough. I don't envy the job, Tim. The more you tell me about it, don't get me wrong, I'm glad you're doing it. But like I said, I had an idea of what it was, but the more I talk to you, the more we've extrapolated on this. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like even just when you said that we changed a rule that made it so that you couldn't knee until at least 5 fights. I'm like, oh, that should be like Tim saying, hey, no knees until 5 fights. I didn't know it was a 10-month process to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, which I guess is a good thing because you don't want some guy coming in and basically like, let's say whoever your successor will be comes in and says like, oh, Tim made all these rules, erase. And now we have none of these. So like at least
you got to go through that process.
Yeah.
Once the new person figures that out, they'll be like, I'm not changing that rule.
So if I might ask, you've been doing this for so long, and we've had conversations about the longevity of your line of work. Have you thought about retiring?
Oh yeah, I've thought about it numerous times. I have 38 years in the state retirement system. I was a deputy sheriff for just under 5 years, so I bought that county time a few years ago, and so I'm 7 years past when I can originally retire. So for me right now, I have a couple factors. The first one is, number one, I do love this job. I mean, although the weekends do wear on you, it's kind of like today, we're talking outside. I thanked you for giving me something to do, because this is the hardest part. Is I did all the paperwork last night, and I'm just basically sitting around waiting today. And when you do this every weekend, you're thinking, man, if I was home, I could do that, or I could do this, or I'm missing this or missing that. So that's the hard part, is that I see myself missing too much with family. Now I've got 3 grown kids, and I just don't get to see them as much, and we're big family people. So, but again, 38 years in the retirement system, I can retire anytime. The state has what's called a backdrop program that, they'll pay you either a lump sum if you retire, but if you happen to pass away before you retire, you do not get that. So that is very significant. With my 38 years, I mean, it's
a good chunk of change.
It's a good chunk of change, so I have to
and deserved.
Keep that in mind.
38 years deserved.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, the retirement is good, but I still want to do something in retirement. But unfortunately, I can't do this because I'm be doing the same thing, and I don't want to work weekends anymore. So I don't know. I've kind of put in my mind maybe next year, but I'm one of these guys that I have to be busy. I mean, when I took those 2 weeks off earlier this year, I was ready to come back to work.
But you've been doing this for 30 years, Tim. This is like all. I don't want to say this is all you know, but like this is the new standard set for you. This is the new norm.
Yeah.
Ben Lawler and the Tom James family will ensure that whether you're purchasing your first custom fit suit or your 50th, the process is unrivaled. With the experience and quality of the Tom James name, allow Ben Lawler to help shape the vision that is your professional brand with a suit that speaks to the conviction in their craft. With fabric sourced here in the US, you'll know quality and craftsmanship are top of class. Like a sculptor examines wet clay before creating a masterpiece, Ben Lawler will walk you through the process of selection, measuring, and stitching to ensure your finished product is a work of art. Putting your trust in Ben is a guarantee that your brand will elevate to the next level. And always remember, you don't get a second chance at a first impression. So you actually bring up a pretty good point. I used to think that my career in fighting was like pretty busy because I was training, I had to cut weight, and my family was making a lot of sacrifices. How many dinners I missed because I couldn't go out to eat with them, how many occasions I missed because I was training or I was, traveling for fights or whatever. Dude, that must be to the umpteenth degree for you, because like the 1 year where you guys had 50 events, that's 50 weeks out of the year where you're not at home with the family. And a younger guy you just got married and all these other things. Can you just, and I want to be careful how I ask this, Tim, but like, can you briefly just go over the cost to do this for you?
Yeah,
because you say you love it, but there's also
there's
a price
cost
to be paid.
Yeah, there's this year, from January 10th till June 22nd, I had 4 weekends where I didn't have fights. I think it was 31 or 32 fights during that span.
Jesus.
So my office is made up of myself full time, and I have a secretary full time. She does all the licensing, plus she takes care of most of the wrestling events. And I don't have a backup other than per diem people who work for me get paid part-time to work. So my biggest problem is I don't really have a backup right now for the St. Louis area. I've got some guys who can do weigh-ins, but I'm not sure I have guys that can run a show, just because of their work schedules too. So it does take a toll on you. I as I get older, I feel like I need to spend more time with my family, which hopefully next weekend when I'm in Kansas City, I'll get to see one of them. But I do try to, when I do these trips, I do try to get out and see my kids, when I can. Fortunately, 2 of them don't live in Missouri, so it makes it a little tougher. But anyway, it's that's the biggest grind for me is just the week in and week out. A couple weekends a month are fine, but right now I'm on a 5-week stretch. This is week 2. I've got 3 more weekends after this week, and then we're off Labor Day, and then there's 2 fights on September 7th. I have to go to one of those for sure. But hopefully this fall I'm going to try to lay out of some of the shows, but gosh, there's people just coming out of the woodwork that want to do shows.
Well, I was going to ask you that is like, with an increase in volume, because there's more promotions coming up, and then you say that you don't necessarily have like like someone to pass the baton to. Have there not been people that have kind of, because I'm sure you've had this conversation about possibly retiring sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Have people not kind of come up to be like, hey, like I'm throwing my hat in the ring?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Okay.
I've had a few people do that. I've got one person that's kind of shadowing me a little bit right now. I have the ability to hire a part-time person, hourly person that, does my job. But unfortunately, getting ready for fights each week I'll go in on Monday, turn money in, do results, do suspensions, do ID cards, then I leave, usually by noon. But then the rest of the week, I'm preparing fight cards for the future. I probably have 7 or 8 fight cards on my desk where we're getting medicals in, proven fighters, things like that. I need that person in the office during that time frame, because that's the job, really, is knowing what needs to be done prior to the show. Getting to the show is more or less just collecting paperwork, and then knowing the rules when something crazy happens in the ring or cage to know what to instruct your referees to do. Yeah. So it's going to take some time. It'll be a steep learning curve for whoever gets this job.
Can I ask you, on fight night, what is under the purview of the state? So you guys take care of, obviously, the State Athletic Commission staff, right? So like Jerry and some of the other people. You guys handle the referees as well?
Right. So I assign all the referees, the judges, timekeeper, doctor.
Okay.
And the reason I assign the doctor is that malpractice insurance is just ungodly.
Through the roof.
Most doctors now work for corporations that do not allow them to work outside of the practice and be covered under the malpractice. So the majority of the doctors who work for me are actually per diem state employees. I actually pay their fee. Promoter pays a little bit of a fee for suturing for them, but then they have coverage from the attorney general in the event that they're sued.
That's genius.
Yeah, I've at least had one doctor sued over the death of a fighter years ago, and
Jesus.
it just ruined that doctor, ruined the referee. I mean, the referee quit after that too. I mean, everybody got sued when this occurred. Now,
Was this a boxing match?
boxing match, Randy Carver, yeah, 1999. It was the same year that Owen Hart fell from the ceiling of the Kemper Arena during a WWE event. I had two deaths that year, plus a Katie Dallum, the what was that boxing movie with Clint Eastwood in it? Clint Eastwood. This,
$1 Million Baby.
yep, that was Katie Dallum. She fought up in St. Joe.
Wait, was this all in Missouri? The
All
state
in
of Missouri?
same year. Yeah, same year. She fought up in St. Joe against Maya Anani and had an enclosed, head injury, and she's obviously not right yet. She did live. And then we had Randy Carver, who was fighting at Harrah's Casino in Kansas City. Obviously, probably dehydrated, had an enclosed head injury. He did pass away. And then we had Owen Hart, who was a WWE wrestler, that his harness coming from the ceiling malfunctioned. He fell from the ceiling of Kemper Arena, all in 1 year. So,
How does that affect you, your staff, and everybody? Obviously, you're saying like, in the event of the boxer, the referee essentially like was never able to recover. I mean,
yeah, it's hard. I can tell you, yeah, because I knew Randy. I knew Randy from being an amateur fighter, and then when he turned pro, he was undefeated, and it was for an NABF title fight. Matter of fact, I still have the gloves the opponent was wearing in my office that night because we had confiscated those, just to make sure there wasn't anything
and were they legit?
inappropriate or altered. There was nothing. It was just a simple case of I think Randy was it was about 100 degrees that night fighting outside, and he was just dehydrated, and just happened. But anyway, it does for the referees. It takes a toll mentally. I can tell you that. I did go to his funeral because I knew him so well, and we weren't getting harassed or anything. I mean, people understood that it was just a freak thing that occurred. So,
do you feel like sometimes I want to be careful how I ask this, Tim, because I don't want to seem disrespectful, but like your job is impossible because you're trying to protect people from doing something that's like incredibly dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can put the guardrails as much as you want, but at the end of the day, these guys are getting into car crashes when they get in that ring.
They
or that
are.
cage.
They are. Promoters get tired of hearing this, but when they give me a really terrible fighter, I always say to them, "What happens if this person dies in the ring? What is my answer to their parents or to a reporter why I approved that fight? Because I don't have one right now.
Yeah.
And you tell me what that answer is." And they don't have an answer, and I'm like, "Well, that's why I'm not approving them, because this fight, this person's record, is not going to cut it.
It shouldn't happen."
No, it shouldn't happen. Yeah, no, thankfully on Randy's fight, the guy was from Philadelphia. He was just a tough fighter, just a brutal fight. So anyway, but yeah, we do assign all those officials, and I have a small pool of officials for a reason. I've got 2 referees right now who are in shadowing program. They're getting ready to make their debuts this fall, so we'll see what they got. But since Mike England passed away last November, he was my number one guy. I mean, he started out about the same year I did. And he started judging for me and early on, and then he started refereeing. And so when he passed away, it left a void because he knew boxing, he knew kickboxing, he knew MMA, and more importantly, in MMA and kickboxing, he knew the proper mechanics, because that type of refereeing is more mechanical than anything. You get a knockdown. What is your process? Fighter's down. Send the fighter to the neutral corner. Pick up the count from the timekeeper. But that seems to be so hard for some of our guys to pick up. Now they're getting better, but that's one thing that we have to improve upon is our mechanics.
The last conversation I had with Mike England was with the Shamrock FC event at Lake of the Ozarks. They did like the outdoor event.
Yeah.
And that was the night where I had to do an exhibition. Like Jesse was like, "Hey, we're gonna have one exhibition kickboxing. Do you mind refereeing?" And I was like, "Hey, I've never refereed before. Like, is it cool with the state?" They're like, "Yeah, it's gonna be fine with the state because it's an exhibition. They don't want to do it with like the state referee. So like, we're just gonna use you." I was like, "Okay, well, I feel knowledgeable enough." Afterwards, Mike England was like, "You did a great job, man." Like he was like really trying to sell me on becoming like an official. He's like, we need refs, like we need this, we need that, like we could really use someone like you. And I felt so bad telling him no because I could tell that he was so passionate about it. Yeah. And then when he would tell me about how many events he would work, I mean, he was telling me, "I'm going to be here on this week, next week I'm going to be there." Similar to you, where like, I mean, he was on the road as much as you were.
Right. So he worked for me quite a bit, and then early in his career, he worked a lot over in Illinois doing unregulated MMA. That's kind of how he learned MMA. Was he worked out in America's Top Team gym in Columbia to learn the sport, but then he went over to Illinois and was doing all kinds of fights every weekend. So, yeah.
Rest in peace, Mike.
Incidentally, off the record.
Where essentially the more volume you have, the more money you guys bring in, the more you can do, right? The more people you can hire, what have you. But how does that work with like you are working in tandem with, not in opposition to these promotions? So like they might want to do things, but then here you are kind of like, I don't want to say hindering the business, but their job is to make this work. Perhaps they want to cut corners where they can, where your job is more as like an auditor to keep them honest and safe. So like, how do you kind of handle this relationship between like, you want them to succeed, you want them to be as profitable as they can to continue working and doing all this stuff, building up fighters and keeping everybody, giving them a platform. But simultaneously, you're kind of like their police, right? Like you're policing them. Right. How do you manage that relationship? Because, Jesse does something and you now feel like you're lucky I didn't reprimand you, right? It's almost like...
Yeah. No, it's very difficult. I with those guys, when something like that happens, I can remember a fight here a couple months ago where I emailed him and said, this opponent's not going to fight. So, boom, phone rings. First thing I say is, he's not fighting. He's not fighting. I don't know why you're calling me, but he's not fighting. And he proceeded to tell me why he should fight. And then I proceeded to tell him why he shouldn't fight. And so I do get into those type of situations with people, but I think they know when not to cross the line.
Yeah.
So, even though I said it in the email, sometimes they'll call me and give me their side of it, and I might change my mind, but more often than not, when I started the conversation without him even get to say a word, he's not fighting. He knew this was a losing cause. So yeah, I don't mind if people provide me with additional information maybe that I don't have, and I will consider it. Sometimes I change my mind, sometimes I don't. But a lot of it is just my past experience with the fighter. If I felt like they haven't given their all or their skills are poor, I won't budge off that. And that happens more than you can imagine.
Oh, so. I'm sure. This is one thing that I guess I never really thought about, but like you also have relationships with fighters. I mean, you know
yeah.
all these guys.
Yeah, that's the sad part is we license everybody, even the referees and judges. They're licensees, and they get to be. They're told when they do things wrong too, and that's part of my job to tell them when they do something wrong, and that's the hardest part because we're friends. We're together all the time, know about their families and everything that's going on in their life, and then yet you have to, calm down when they do something wrong. But most of my guys I won't hire an official that's arrogant. I mean, I've been down that road before years ago, and so if they're not my same type of mentality where they take constructive criticism, then I don't want them.
When you mean like an official who's arrogant, you mean they don't have an ability to be malleable and change?
They think the people are buying tickets to come and watch them as opposed to the fighters.
The fighters. No, that's fair.
I could name a list of them, but I probably shouldn't do it here. But they won't work here. I won't allow people like that here. I just will not do it. And it's kind of funny that the guys I have now and I really rib Dwayne Bess a lot. you know, because he didn't really know much about kickboxing. He's getting better, but he'll make mistakes here and there, and then, you know, so I got to rib him every time he does something a little wrong and say, hey, did you count to 7 that time, or did you count to 8, or you know, and that's, we have a good relationship, and those guys learn from that. It's kind of like I hear a referee every once in a while when they're breaking fighters, they'll say break, 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 break. Like no, 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 it's break once, loud.
Set the standard.
You know, those things just drive me nuts. Or stop, 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 stop.
What
You
is
know?
the process of like hiring like referees? Okay, like let's take a step back. I understand your role in this, but like let's say I'm Dwayne Best and I want to be like a referee. What is the process someone goes through to be, you know, a timekeeper, a judge, a referee? Now, obviously, those three are completely different roles, right?
Right.
So, like to be a referee and a judge might take a little bit more than a timekeeper, but I'm sure the timekeeper also has like some sort of curriculum they have to understand before they get involved. So, like, who sets the curriculum? Is that you?
I do. So with MMA years ago, before we regulated, I always told them you got to go do amateurs. Can't do pros because I can't allow that.
Meaning refereeing
Refereeing
amateurs.
in the amateurs. Now, since we regulate it, I've just started a shadowing program where if you've been to the fights, you'll see the 2 guys that are shadowing right now. And so basically, they're going to start off with just supervising the greasing cage side. I'll let them do grappling matches if we have some occasionally. I've thrown them in there to do a couple fights just here and there, but this fall, the 2 guys that I have shadowing right now, they've got assignments, so they're going to work just like the regular referees. So shadowing program for those. Same thing for judges, and I tell every official up front, look, you think you can do this right now, but I'll tell you, you can't.
It's a lot harder than it looks.
Yeah, and I say, this is going to take a long time. This is going to be a slow process. So unless you can, if you can't commit 6 months to a year to this shadowing and just watching and observing, then you're wasting your time because I'm not going to put you in there. And luckily, I have these 2 referees that are, they've paid the price and they deserve an opportunity. Now, judging's the same way. Again, any of us can judge 90% of the rounds. We can tell you what. But the problem is when you get about that 10%, and then a world-class judge can tell you how much a person won a round or lost a round by. And so occasionally I'll get people who will complain to me and say, I won that fight, you know, and I'll send the video to the referees and they'll watch it, or I'll just ask for a reply. And the guys I have right now, the majority of them, can say, okay, he did this, 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 this in this round. He'll list exactly what they did, you know, rather than say, well, he had more strikes.
Yeah.
The guys I work that are working right now for me, I think I have some pretty good guys right now, and women for that matter.
People, yeah.
Yeah, people that they can articulate who won a round. But it's kind of funny. I had a review on a fight here. It's been a couple years ago, and so I got the video, and I also got the commentary. So I'm listening to these commentators, thinking, "You don't know the scoring criteria. You don't know the score. No wonder you're opposed to what the judge did. Had no idea what scoring criteria is. You know, just keep in mind the scoring criteria is strikes, submission, control. If you win strikes, it don't matter what else happened. You win the round.
No shit. Even in MMA?
In MMA, if you win in striking, you win the round. It doesn't matter what else happens.
There has to be some sort of gray area, though, correct? Because, like, let's say you got off on the striking. Mm-hmm. I go for a takedown, and then I have like 3 or 4 submission attempts. Maybe the striking is like 1 minute of the round. Mm-hmm. Surely the submission attempts take over after that, right? Even though he may have gotten the better of me in striking. Now, I'm not saying he dropped me, I'm hurt, the fight is almost over. I agree with you there.
It depends on the quality of the submission attempts. I mean, if you're not getting anything out of it.
Very fair.
But the bottom line, the hierarchy is damage and striking. So if you are striking and damaging, that outweighs everything. Now, if that's equal, then you go on down the hierarchy of your submissions and your control.
Or non-existent, then you have to go to the hierarchy.
Right. So again, getting back to judging, everybody thinks they can judge, but the problem is they can't they have difficulty judging those rounds that are really close.
There's a lot of criticism in MMA in particular. I'm going to kind of step away from the boxing because boxing is not really my forte, to
Right,
be
right.
completely honest with you. So I'm going to keep it kind of to MMA. There's a lot of criticism in MMA regarding judges. Now, I'm not saying from the state of Missouri. I'm saying just like broadly, right? How many
Sure.
times has there been a UFC card where a judge's scorecard will be read and then like the Twitter feed is just like, what the hell? All these other things. Do you subscribe to the thought process that judges for fights should consist solely of former fighters?
No, no, not at all. It's all about, in my mind, it's all about concentration. If you can concentrate, you can teach anyone to judge and not have bias. You know, there's been several fights where I have a judge sitting next to me, and then, especially in these smaller cages, the judge sitting next to me scores the round the way I would have scored it, but the judges on the two other sides score it totally opposite. And I can tell you, it makes a huge difference, because what people don't understand is a judge is only judging what they see. So if a fight is occurring right in front of me up against the cage with a judge next to me, and all the striking is next to us, those two other guys, other judges, aren't seeing that. So that's nothing. So again, people, and the other thing about fans is they always have a favorite.
Very fair.
They can only see one fighter's punches landing. They don't see the other fighter. So I take that into consideration. And when I do have, when I get upset with judges, is that when I see a judge miss an obvious round. That's the only time I get upset with them. I mean, if you miss an obvious round, I'm going to tell you.
Do you see those? Do you see those rounds coming in live? Like, let's say
Yes.
you're at an event, because I never knew this. I didn't know if it was like the rounds are happening, they score it, and then at the end of the fight they hand over the card, or is it each round they hand over a card and you get to see?
Yeah. So each round you'll see the referee walking around. He's picking up scorecards. I don't allow. Some states still allow you to have your scoring all on one page. And you turn in. That allows you an opportunity to catch up.
Yeah, or erase something.
Yeah, erase. If you realize you at the end you might be on the wrong side, that allows. I'm not saying that happens, but there's potential it could happen. So no, they score. If they score a round, they have to turn it in. Then they start over from the beginning. It's a new round. Just like each fighter is equal. And it's interesting that when the UFC comes here, they have all their scoring on iPads. So the judges actually score the iPad first, which comes to a main computer to me, so I can see them immediately. And then they do a paper card as a backup.
Just in case.
But
how much different is it when, I'm sure this is like a vast delta, but like when the UFC comes to town and the well-oiled machine that they are versus like the local promotion in terms of like the back end, the things we don't see, is it easy to work with them? Is it like a monumental task? Like for you as the state athletic commission, when the UFC comes to town, are you guys like, oh shit, boys, get ready? Or are you guys like, hell yeah? Like,
no, it's easy. It's easy. They have so many employees that are so streamlined on what their role is. I mean, basically, they tell us where to stand, and when we're in the ring, they don't bother us at all. It's really easy. For me, it's more stress because you're all
lights are on.
Yeah, lights are on. All your commissioners around the country are watching. Every critic in the world is watching. Luckily after our last UFC, I didn't get any fan mail, which is good. Now, some of our judges, it's kind of funny reading, they'll text me or send me Twitter stuff that people are saying.
Like, how could this judge think this?
How could you judge that? But I didn't get any this time. And usually I'll get one or two that, how could you point that judge or referee? But the UFC is good to work with. I mean, what I do with any large promotion like that is, they have outside judges and referees they like to use. And so I make them submit a list.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, they submit a list to me. Most of these guys I use, I know from the past. The guys that I bring in here that everybody knows. I love Keith Peterson. I love Jason Herzog, Bergliotta. Those guys have worked for me. I've known them outside of fighting, seeing them in other states. And they're very similar to me. I try to bring people in that are low maintenance, that I don't have to worry about them doing anything or acting crazy. And Keith Peterson's number one. I mean, he's a guy. He's a straight-laced guy. He's
No
diesel
nonsense.
Mechanic. Yeah, diesel.
Don't
mechanic.
ask Dominic Cruz about him though.
Yeah, and it was great because on this last fight card, I don't remember who it was. He called me up and said, "Hey, I see where so and so's on fight card. I had an issue with him somewhere." I'm like, "Hey, I just appreciate you telling me. You won't work the fight."
That's a
No
cool.
big deal.
That's a
Yeah,
cool.
that's great that they do stuff like
Integrity was the word you used earlier. He knows that there's like a conflict of bias, and he doesn't even want there to be a question.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciated that. Yeah, so much. But again, with the UFC, and I will say the majority of our longtime promoters have got it down.
Yeah.
Where they understand that this is what has to be done. They're organized. Their weigh-ins are relatively short. The fighters they use are respectful. I mean, and Jesse's number one on praising fighters for being on time.
Yeah.
Being respectful. And he always, at the weigh-in, when he's there, if everybody's been on time, he always points that out to them. So appreciate it. We all appreciate it because if you ever travel outside of Missouri and go to another state, you'll realize it's not so bad here.
Yeah.
We try to treat people with respect. We try to get through all this mound of paperwork and be respectful of everyone. So.
I don't want to badmouth other state athletic commissions or anything like that, but like I've been to other shows cornering people and stuff like that where I look to my left, I look to my right, and I was like, what is this shit show, dude?
Yeah, there's one in particular that he's passed away now, but they had a bike cage around his table, and if you dared stepping inside of that bike cage, you were getting your ass chewed.
Stop.
This is not for anybody else but me. So those are just things I saw years ago. That's not the way I am.
Can I ask you a question that I was just thinking about now because you brought up the whole thing like Jesse acknowledging the fighters being like respectful and courteous and professional. Do you recall the incident where Dan Hardy, after a fight, Herb Dean came out and Dan Hardy was basically like yelling at Herb Dean, like aggressively yelling, and Dana White later came out and said that like Dan Hardy, who was a commentator for the UFC at the time, was now fired, was now let go because he was like, by no way is this acceptable for like one of our staff to talk to a state athletic, any state commissioner or any state representative or employee in this way. Do you think that that kind of standard is set from the top down? You were saying when Jesse, says, "Hey, good job, guys," and all these other things, that it actually, it's more powerful than we originally think because now these guys that might not necessarily exclusively fight in Missouri go somewhere else and they're like, oh, hey, I was praised for this and how I interacted with these people and all these other things. And you're telling me extensively in this conversation how you know these fighters. You've built a relationship with these people and, you know some of these guys better than others. And I always thought that I was, not the term taken care of, because I don't think I was like, given special treatment or anything.
Just treated with respect.
I was treated with respect.
Yeah.
I was never disrespected. They knew that I was miserable during weigh-ins. They tried to make it as a simple process. I knew that, these guys are here for helping me and making sure everything's running smoothly. So I try to be respectful and everything back. Do you feel like this professionalism or level of is dictated by the promotion or dictated by the individual?
No, I think it's dictated by the promotion.
You think?
I mean, if they communicate with their fighters and fighters know what their expectations are from the beginning, know what their paperwork going to fill out, being on time, it just makes it so much better for everyone. So, and again, Nemesis is great. I mean, their paperwork is great. Zach Cummings, Joe Wooster and them, they're the only one, and Scott Cutbirth with FAC, they fill out all the paperwork. And this is what we're going to get to here. Hopefully in December, our new licensing system will be set up to where you as a fighter, you as a corner person, you'll go online, you'll get your license online. You'll fill out all your medical paperwork. So after you get licensed, we do pre-fight physicals and everybody. Fighters will have to fill those out online before the day of the weigh-in. And then I print them off and bring them with me. So we're going to get to the point of where when I show up at the weigh-in, you step on the scale, and if the doctor's ready to do your physical, otherwise you're done.
Nice.
We're talking 20 minutes max.
Yeah.
If everybody will follow the program. And the new license system will be set up where you can use an iPhone, iPad, computer. All the forms I have will be online. I'll be able to download them. So it's going to be a while to get to that, get people in that mode of doing work, but it's going to be so much better on everybody. But getting back to Joe and Scott over in Kansas City, they're the only promotion right now that they complete all the paperwork for everybody. So their applications, their physical forms, everything is completed.
They get with the fighters. They ask them, "Hey, what's all this?"
beforehand.
And then send it over
Send
to
it to
you.
me. I print them off. I've got them right there. Basically, they walk in, they pay me their license fees, and then step on the scale.
That's beautiful.
And it's great. I mean, at weigh-ins, 45 minutes max up there. So, and a lot of the promotions are getting to that. Marlene does the same thing.
Marlene with NFA.
Yeah, she's a paper person. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. That doesn't shock me.
So,
If you don't mind, because we're about an hour and a half in, I have a couple of things that I kind of want to just spitfire at you,
Okay.
and then you could tell me what you think or why not. Okay.
okay.
Early weigh-ins in the state of Missouri. Why is it that we don't have like all the weigh-ins be at like 10 a.m. and why are they like usually like, for instance, I can speak anecdotally for myself. I can't tell you how annoying it is. Like when I was fighting for Shamrock, like I'm on weight at 10 a.m. Now I have to like wait 7 brutal hours until weigh-ins. Luckily for us, it used to be that we had to weigh in at 6. I don't know if you recall this, but like Shamrock and the state was like, no, the official weigh-in is at 6 with the show. And then you guys took it back at an hour. Basically, you get in, you fill out your paperwork and all that stuff. When I hand you the back paperwork, like I step on the scale, and then by the time 6 rolls around, I'm probably like halfway hydrated again.
Yeah.
But why is it that like we could do 5 and not like 10 a.m.? Is it logistics? Is it staff?
No, the weigh-in is totally up to the promoter. I prefer.
So it's a Shamrock thing.
Yeah, it's up to them.
Brother Jesse and Rob have been throwing you under the bus. They're like, well, the state
it's not
can't
a
get
state
here
thing.
until 5.
I'm ready to go at 9 a.m.
Yes,
in the morning if they
okay.
wanna do it. No, it is a promotional decision. I think a lot of it depends on how many guys they can get there. Because I'm not coming if you only have 50% of the people there.
Yeah.
But I prefer. I love these early day weigh-ins. For me, it's just it's just
Because
nice.
you don't have to be there for the show. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, like, if you come in, let's say, like, weigh-ins was at 10, okay? So we come in, we do weigh-ins. The state watches, observes, and credits it. If we do, like, a weigh-in show
weigh-in,
at 5, what do you care? It's like, none of this is legit. It's all for,
Yeah, that's like the UFC. They start their weigh-ins at 9 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's got to be weighed by 11. We do pre-fight physicals right there, and then they do their mock weigh-in. I'm done at 11. I go back to my hotel room.
Yeah, and just
do,
chill out. Or
update
you could be
on-
at the weigh-ins if you want, but you're there as like a spectator, not as the state athletic commission.
Right.
Can I ask you what's the rule in terms of like how much time can elapse between weigh-ins and fight? Because that was my one
48
question.
hours. So you have
48
to have
hours
a
is
weigh-in,
tough.
and I wrote that rule that way. So when day before morning weigh-ins became popular, that they would allow that. It used to be 24 hours, but now we just backed it up. And again, I love the day weigh-ins. I know Zach Cummings and several other promoters for that matter. I've got scheduled stuff on the night the weigh-in would normally be, and promoters have worked with me, and I thank them for that, for doing noon weigh-ins, because like I say, during football season, I'm committed every Friday to refereeing football. So several of the promoters, they'll do noon weigh-ins on Friday, which allows me time to get back to Jeff City and go wherever I
your
gotta go
thing.
that night.
And I'm
So-
sure the fighters are not complaining. It's just less
no.
time that they have to sit there miserable.
No, they like it. So yeah, no, it's up to the promoter, not me.
Good to know, Tim. Good to know. Another question I had is regarding the difference between professional and amateurs. And this is always the one that like I briefly talked to you about this beforehand, but forgive me because I do want to have this discussion on camera. I think it's so crazy that the threshold for the difference between a professional and amateur is whether or not they're getting quote unquote paid to fight, right? Now you, in your efforts to kind of try to like legitimize amateurs and then subsequently being a pro, have said, hey, 5 fights at least and a winning record. And I think that's the step in the right direction to have like some sort of rubric. But could you explain to me like why is it why is it money that stipulates this? Why is it not some sort of threshold of skill or something? Like if I give you $1, you could be 4 and 3, let's say, and I give you $1, now you're a pro. This seems crazy to me. Like $1 is the stipulation between pro and amateur.
Yeah, I think it's that way. Number one, it's a definition of what a professional person is. They get paid to do, their skill. I really don't have a good answer for that because the skill level at a pro should be obviously better than an amateur. And we just want to make sure that there's not a wide range in the skill of one fighter and another. You know, I wish that most people would do their 5 or 6 fights and probably turn pro. But again, I don't think promoters want that because the expense.
It's
I mean,
it's
the
cheaper to have
expense
a card
is,
full of amateurs.
yeah, yeah. You can put on an event that looks like a professional event and cost you very little other than your normal expenses, and not pay anyone. So I think it's a I think it's a choice that most promoters make because most promoters could do a full fight of pro cards, but they're going to have a heck of a lot of ticket sellers out there.
Yeah, or they're gonna have to figure out the financials of it.
Yeah, for me, it really makes no difference to me anymore whether it's pro or amateur. Um, it's just that experience level and growing the sport because I see what's happening in boxing now is the participation in amateurs is going down. So I see a lot of people making pro debuts that can't provide an amateur record at
Background.
all. Yeah, so what do I know about them? I know the opponent they're fighting for the most part. Um, I'm
And that's why
running.
you're trying to extend that rule that you have in MMA over to boxing. That
That's
makes,
right.
I would have assumed that that rule had already been in place in boxing and that you extended it from boxing to MMA. It's kind of
Yeah,
crazy how you're working backwards, considering
it
boxing has
is
been around longer.
because in boxing, I've just been relying upon the matchmaker to tell me about these guys' skills. But when they get there, then I realize they have no skills.
Yeah.
And I just can't let that happen anymore. I know I'm catching a lot of heck over that because a lot of people don't want to be in the amateurs, but I let them have amateur kickboxing experience, amateur MMA experience. That all counts towards your fights. I try to be as lenient as I can to at least make sure they've experienced being in the ring and getting hit and how they're going to react when that happens.
Can I introduce a different paradigm? You let me know if I'm crazy or not. So why isn't that we have fighting like anybody can get paid and we eliminate professional and amateur and add like tiers the same way we do in like baseball? Like there's like minor leagues and major leagues, right? Why is it not that like we have like entry level pros or like pro C and then there's pro B and then pro A would be like UFC. So like pro C could be like, you know, your starter fighter from a local promotion. Pro B could be like main event, co-main event, the guys that are like on the cusp of like getting into the UFC, PFL, Bellator, what have you. And then Pro A would be these are the creme de la creme, the top of our league, right? But like that way everybody can get paid. I guess the reason I bring this up is you brought up a very good point in the fact that like this amateur pro paradigm serves many purposes, right? So like from the safety perspective, from your perspective, it's like amateurs should not be at the same skill level as pros, and we need to segregate these people to protect and facilitate the growth of the sport.
Yeah.
100% agree with you. The one place where I disagree is then how it's being used by the promotions in like essentially free labor, right? Like they
It
can do
is.
a pro-am, have 8 fights on a card or 10 fights on a card, and only 2 of them are professional. The other 8 are amateur, and a lot of the crowd are none the wiser.
Right, right.
Why is it not that we can just have like still have that segregation to protect fighters, but still put the onus of paying these guys on the promotion? Now, this is all hypothetical, right? I'm just like thinking out loud. But like, if does this sound crazy?
Well, no, it doesn't sound crazy. The problem that I see with it is it's going to be discretion. Who gets to decide whether that person is a C, B, or A? And we're gonna differ greatly on that,
The metric.
depending on the need of the promoter.
Very fair. Very fair.
So again, I've had this in the last month or so. I sent a letter out to all our promoters, and I just reminded them that please remember in the rule it says that an amateur can be paid a maximum of $100. Period.
travel.
Period. Yeah, to participate in your event. They can't be paid the percentage of ticket sales. They can't be given free gym access. Okay. So then I have one that says, well, what about NIL? Well, that's image and likeness. Okay. That's not paying you to fight. Okay. So if you go out and get a sponsor on your shorts, there's not a whole hell of a lot I can do about it.
It has nothing to do with you
Yeah.
getting paid to fight.
Right, right. So again, I have no issue with what you're talking about. The problem is that I'll be the one making that decision.
Yeah.
And some people will agree, some will disagree. I have no issue with it. No.
I'm just interested in like, you know, there's a lot of things that make sense to me. I get the time limit difference between pros and amateur, giving the pros more time to work, because when you're better at offense, you're also better at defense. So you're going to need some of that. I agree with some of the things like for lacerations, knees and elbows specifically, because if you're going to start developing scar tissue, you might as well get paid for that, right?
That's right.
There are a lot of things that make sense to me, and including the medical suspensions. Like, I think you get 7 days even if you win, just because you've been a part of a fight, which I think is smart, right? Even if I go out there and mollywop the guy, it probably wouldn't be in my best interest to go through another weight cut and do another camp immediately and all these other things. So
Very true.
Let alone if I lost, then you definitely need to save the fighter from themselves. That one was always the one that was kind of weird to me, because, and you bring up a good point with the name, image, and likeness, is like, I'm not paying you to play football. I'm not paying you to play hockey or basketball. I'm paying you for your name, your image, and your likeness, which is, you totally can make the argument that it's because of that sport, but it's completely detached.
Well, and again, I think it all comes down to dollars, to be honest with you, with your concept, in that promoters now, all of them are the same. From what I see on our club level, and I include Nemesis, Shamrock,
FAC, Synergy,
everybody, like the ones who don't come in from outside. At our level, they're not getting rich. Okay, no. They're not. By the time you pay for officials, you pay for insurance, you pay for ambulance, you pay for all your staff, because most of these promoters do pay all their staff now. They're not volunteers anymore. And at the end of the day, they're making $3,000, $4,000, $5,000.
I've heard anywhere between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
Profit.
Yeah, there's not that big a profit. Now the part that I don't get and I'm not privy to is what their pay-per-view buys, how that does. Because Shamrock, they've got a lucrative contract, but what does that really mean? So when you sell it, your event on pay-per-view, what you're paying $9, $15, $20 for it. If you get 100 buys, it's a drop in the bucket.
Is the juice worth the squeeze? But then the argument can be made that they're already going to do it because they have the production value for the in-house, right? So like Nemesis, they have the big screen. Shamrock have the screens. They're going to do it regardless. Why not? But I can understand what you're saying is like, how much of that is actually like a return on investment?
Right. The good part about like Shamrock, just for example, because they're the longest running promoter I have right now, is just when Mike passed away, they had all this historical videos and pictures, and man, they were so helpful, during his memorial, and just producing stuff like that, gosh, you're just so thankful. Because when I first started, nobody videotaped nothing.
You had Polaroids, my man.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the great part. But that's the part I understand is how much money do they really make on that? Is that
from my anecdotal experience, from the conversations I've had with the promoters, I would say that some are more lucrative than others, but then I think it's because of experience. And like you were saying earlier, like it becomes a well-oiled machine and like they know what they're doing. So I think a lot of like the delta in terms of profitability stems from their ability to be efficient. And how do you get efficiency? With experience.
That's right. One other thing I'll say is that, whether you like Shamrock or not, and what your opinion is, I think they raised the bar for everyone else for the production.
100%.
They've made everybody. You've got to have a great ring announcer. You got to have lights and smoke, and music is so important. I was at a fight last Friday night, and I won't say where it was. You can look it up.
They didn't have a DJ.
They had a DJ, but they didn't play no music between rounds. I'm like, what's your job? And they didn't know. It's just stuff like that you're sitting there scratching your head, that these productions are more about fights. They're more about the whole experience, which everybody here and in Kansas City, for that matter, they got to figure it out.
Yeah.
But there's others who just, we're not playing music. It's nobody's saying. It's like the pin drop in here.
Tim, I want to. We've been on this for an hour and 43 minutes, man.
It's going to cost you. You know that,
right? Oh, hey. Listen, you want to get lunch or something?
No, I'm good. I got to go do some paperwork for tonight. I appreciate it.
I want to say thank you for two things. First, thank you for taking the time to be on this podcast and to talk to me about stuff that I was curious about.
Absolutely.
And second, after talking with you, after realizing so many of the things that I didn't know, I also want to say thank you as a fighter. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the staff that you have. I didn't realize it at the time, but the importance of it post fact. I just want to say thank you for your body of work and your dedication to this, dude. Because for me as an athlete, I benefited from it, even if I didn't know it. So from one man to another, thanks, my man.
I appreciate it. I'll tell you what, it's interesting. I don't say this a whole lot, but when I do get an opportunity to speak publicly, I always remind people that when you're in the business of telling people no, it's extra special when people thank you for what you do. Because trust me, they get tired of hearing me say no. Thanks for having me here, and I
Tim,
appreciate it.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. You bet.